From taking their anger out on him to being caught using performance enhancement drugs, there seems to be no shortage of reasons why Dana White can't stand some UFC fighters. That said, let's talk about fighters who he despises the most. To start off with, we have Tito Ortiz.
Advantage for Alberto. Down he goes.
Nice whizzer.
So, Tito Ortiz.
The Huntington Beach bad boy, Tito Ortiz, is perhaps one of the most famous people who have beef with Dana. This hatred started early on in Ortiz's career and was displayed on and off throughout it. Ortiz claimed that he was being underpaid and he was feeling undervalued by the company. So, as retaliation, he opted to test the free market, which allegedly upset White. In 2005, the two parties went to court, and they eventually settled out of it. Since then, the two have had several public disagreements. These range from accusations of White not paying for Ortiz's medical bills after his injuries to White not allowing Ortiz to join the Ultimate Fighter reality show. Ortiz even started his own MMA promotion as a direct competitor for the UFC and insults White every chance he gets. This includes almost every single interview that he does.
Maybe start at a... Maybe he should have actually fought Goliath.
They've talked about.
If we're talking about insults, then you should see the way Ken Shamrock talks about White. You can't talk about beefs without bringing up Ken, the world's most dangerous man, Shamrock. This feud began after Shamrock carried on a predetermined fight with Kimo Leopoldo for way too long, which ultimately pushed White over the edge. White asked the referee, Big John McCarthy, to stop the fight, but he allowed Shamrock to continue beating on Kimo.
Shamrock's got Kimo's ankle. They get away.
He's getting it out.
Nothing yet. Awful slimy.
Furious, White got up and grabbed the microphone, telling Shamrock to quit, which only further angered the fighter. He stopped beating his opponent and instead focused his anger on the president of the UFC. Shamrock is still angry at White for his part in calling the fight. He says that he was robbed of the opportunity to win the fight without interference. Well, I don't really blame White for intervening. The pair have never seen eye to eye since then, and Shamrock has been very vocal in his displeasure of White. Despite his retirement from the UFC, he still, to this day, insults White about being given the unfair scenario of being intervened during his fight. It certainly built up a lot of tension between them, and they aren't the only ones. It's true that there's been a lot of tension between Cris Cyborg and Dana White in the past. One issue that has caused friction between Cyborg and White is the negotiation of her fights. Cyborg has been critical of the UFC in the past, saying that they've not offered her enough fights or given her the appropriate amount of promotion.
Leslie hanging on, but she's hurt bad. I don't think she knows where she's at.
She's also accused White of not treating her with respect and has gone on record saying that she feels undervalued by the promotion. In 2017, White and Cyborg had a very public dispute over her potential fight with former bantamweight champion Ronda Rousey. White had said that Cyborg was offered the fight but turned it down due to concerns about the weight cut. Cyborg disputed this claim, saying that she never received a formal offer for the fight and that White was lying.
Oh, several
Nasty
flush
knee.
knees now.
That's
and
it.
this could
That's
do
it.
it.
That's it.
Cris Cyborg.
Another reason for the tension being there is Cyborg's past suspension for a banned substance. While Cyborg has maintained that she did not knowingly take any performance-enhancing drug, White has been critical of her in the past for the positive test. He also used the issue to cast doubt on Cyborg's overall legacy in the sport. Despite these disagreements, Cyborg did eventually fight in the UFC and even held the Women's Featherweight Championship at one point, but she has since left the promotion and signed with rival organization Bellator MMA. I'd say leaving the UFC by choice is something that's still considered somewhat respectable, but imagine the president of the organization banning you for life. Yikes. Well, unfortunately, that's exactly what happened to the next hated fighter on the list. White's not afraid to speak his mind when it comes to fighters, and that includes Paul Semtex Daly. So why does Dana White have a dislike for Daly? Well, it all started back in 2010 when Daly was competing in the UFC. During During a fight against Jon Koscheck, Daly lost his temper and threw a punch after the bell had sounded, which landed squarely on Koscheck's face. It was a dirty move, and Daly was immediately disqualified from the fight. Dana White was not happy with Daly's behavior, to say the least. He famously said that Daly would never fight again in the UFC, and he has stuck to that promise. Despite Daly's success in other organizations, White has refused to allow him back into the UFC. But it's not just the Koscheck incident that has soured White on Daly. In interviews, White has been critical of Daly's attitude and overall professionalism. He's accused Daly of being difficult to work with and not taking his career seriously enough. Of course, it's important to note that there are two sides to every story. Daly has spoken out about the incident with Koscheck and expressed regret for his actions. He's also defended his attitude, saying that he is simply a passionate fighter who speaks his mind. So at the end of the day, it's hard to say exactly why Dana White dislikes Paul Daly so much. It could be a combination of the Koscheck incident, Daly's attitude, or other things that we may never know about. But one thing is for sure, don't expect to see Semtex back in the UFC anytime soon. And there are others you shouldn't ever expect to see just alongside him. White has had a rocky relationship with Ruslan Magomedov. One of the main reasons for the tension between the two seems to be Magomedov's contractual issues with the UFC. In 2017, Magomedov was released from his UFC contract after failing multiple drug tests, which caused him to be suspended from competition. But Magomedov claimed that he had not taken any banned substances and was ultimately cleared by the USADA. But despite this, the UFC did not reinstate his contract, which may have left Magomedov feeling resentful towards the organization and White. Another reason could be Magomedov's fighting style, which some have described as being boring or unexciting. While Magomedov is undoubtedly a skilled fighter, he's known for his cautious approach and defensive tactics. It's not the action-packed fights that the UFC is known for. This could have led to a lack of interest in promoting Magomedov and his fights, which may have further strained his relationship with White. It's also worth noting that White has a reputation for being outspoken and unafraid to express his opinions, which may have contributed to his clashes with Magomedov. The UFC president is known for his love of the sport and his passion for promoting the fighters who he believes will put on the best shows for fans. If he felt that Magomedov was not living up to his potential or was not a good fit for the UFC's brand, he may have expressed his frustrations publicly or behind the scenes. Well, all of these problems that White has had have a start, and one of the first feuds that White had comes with our final fighter on the list. Rampage Jackson's beef with Dana White is one of the oldest ones. This grudge began after Jackson called out White for his disrespectful attitude towards fighters, questioning his ways of doing business. In response, White fired Jackson from the UFC, and the two have gone back and forth ever since. Jackson even threatened to sue White for not honoring the terms of his contract, but the president didn't seem to care. Since then, he's been very vocal about his anger with the UFC president. Despite this, White and Jackson have remained respectful towards each other in past interviews. But it's still clear that the hatred is still there. That's all for why Dana White hates these UFC fighters.